We are now moving very swiftly to... Ladies and gentlemen, we are proceeding to panel one. Thank you very much. Now we are actually moving into the topic that Joe mentioned, and I think Malcolm also mentioned in his remarks, which is the shifting environment and the shifting strategies of European deterrence and the approach in which countries in Europe, including the two nuclear weapon states, UK and France, but also others, can contribute and perhaps transform their approach to deterrence. In case of a Malcolm test, I raised my hand a couple of times. This is also for me my first PONI conference. I'm a relatively new director of PONI and also of RUSI's Proliferation and Nuclear Policy group. So this is a rather exciting day for me. I was happy to meet and talk to a number of you. I'm looking forward to chatting to all of you if possible and continue with the great tradition of PONI conferences. When it comes to our topic, in the last years and months, we have seen already the increased discussion on the European dimension of Western deterrence strategy. It was partly motivated by the Russian nuclear intimidation and coercion in the context of its war with Ukraine, partly about broader concerns, perhaps also about the future of American commitments to European security and the credibility of its extended nuclear deterrence posture. We have we discussed a broad range of ideas. Some of them included the idea of the Eurobomb or Euro deterrent. Some of them were more about how we can make the current existing arrangements, be them in NATO or in other settings, more effective and more fit for purpose. And of course, we need to highlight that, especially in case of NATO, its nuclear posture includes not just the United States, but also the UK and France as the independent centers of decision-making. So in our discussion, we'll go a little bit into what does it mean. There is also a parallel discussions. What role should nuclear weapons play within a broader construct of the Western deterrence mix? What's the place of nuclear in comparison with conventional and other capabilities? And I'm happy to say that this session is truly international. We'll have a transatlantic group of panelists, and we'll hear a number of perspectives tackling of different dimensions of this question of whether the current arrangements are fit for purpose and whether some changes are needed or indeed necessary. Just to remind everyone that as in the first session, the presentations are on the record, the Q&A part of the panel will be off the record. And we'll start with Ilenia Bruseghello, who is the graduate student of the Erasmus Mundus International Master's degree in Security Intelligence and Strategic Studies. Ilenia's areas of interest include emerging technologies, space security, nuclear proliferation. She also is part and participant in a number of networks, in a number of groups that look into this issue in the emerging and early career area. So, Ilenia, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you once again to the RUSI team, all the RUSI team, and UK PONI. I'm really honored and happy to be here today to talk to you about European nuclear deterrence, a new paradigm, a possibility for a new paradigm among these transatlantic and geopolitical shifts. So the topic is increasingly important, given the evolving geopolitical context and Europe's growing aspiration for strategic autonomy, and we're gonna evaluate if that is a possibility or a potential paradigm for the future. Next slide, please. Great. So to begin, it's essential to understand the foundation of nuclear deterrence and nuclear sharing agreements, and what's the current situation right now. So Europeans shaped its security framework and security assessment based on the agreement of nuclear sharing, which dates back to the post-World War II era during which the US stationed nuclear weapons in Europe as part of extended deterrence strategy. So today, nuclear deterrence still relies on the US nuclear umbrella, but we're seeing that in Europe, there's like a strategic shift that involves the current geopolitical events that we're facing. So the question really now is, can Europe sustain a credible deterrence independently? As we're talking and thinking about autonomy in defense, but also questioning if a viable option for nuclear deterrence would be feasible for the future. Okay, so what is the current situation? Why are the European member states actually thinking about this option? So the current situation highlights the shifting of the geopolitical state. So firstly, we've seen, for example, the war in Ukraine has inevitably set a new threat assessment for Europe, pushing European leaders to think about developing a broader European security framework, and like an independent one, which might involve nuclear weapons as well. Especially considering becoming more autonomous, but especially considering NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg's words in July 2024, in which he said that Europe must brace for a decade of Ukraine war. So the European leaders are becoming increasingly worried about this possibility of having to sustain an extended war right on the step door of European Union alone, or maybe not, but especially considering the situation on the other side of the Atlantic. So we're seeing other kind of concern arising from the words of Donald Trump in February 2024, in which he said, quote, I would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell it wants to any NATO country that doesn't pay enough, referring to any NATO member country that doesn't meet spending guidelines on defense. This added another piece of the puzzle to the increasing security uncertainty, so that even the Foreign Affairs commented wondering if the NATO would survive a second Trump's mandate. That might be exaggerated, of course, but that's what is the debate on in the news. In this context, President Emmanuel Macron suggested on several occasions that the French nuclear arsenal should become central to the debate on the European defense as a possibility for a new paradigm of European nuclear deterrence. Next slide, please. So a key issue now arises about French proposal. There might be just Emmanuel Macron's proposal, yes, but we have to consider it now as France's proposal. And it's the issue of credibility. So is it like a credible possibility that the European Union has in this case? So credibility lies on three main factors, as I tend to think, first of all, is the capability. Does actually France has the capability to sustain European deterrence in that sense, and the commitment. So the European states must be sure that there is a clear political will to use nuclear weapons in defense for the European Union, and trust as the last one, but not less important. European states need to trust on each other's defense commitment, especially with regard to the nuclear weapons use. So I put the two flags here just to make a comparison between the nuclear umbrella offered by the United States and a potential umbrella offered by France. So, because in a conversation with President Kennedy in 1961, General de Gaulle asked if the United States would really be ready to trade New York for Paris. And now the question is, yes, but is it Macron ready to trade Paris for Helsinki or Vilnius for all we know now? So especially consider that France has always had like a more self-centered policy regarding their nuclear weapons. Next slide, please. So is it European nuclear deterrence a possibility in the future, a reality? Can it be a reality in the future? So let's explore, before we take as the final stance, the potential for an independent Euro deterrence, understanding and analyzing the advantages and the challenges of this endeavor. When it comes to the advantages, EU might have an enhanced strategic flexibility, allowing Europe to respond independently to regional threats that might be of more of interest to the European states rather than aligning with the US, which is focusing the focus a little bit more on the Indo-Pacific. The second is actually having more political independence from the United States and from the transatlantic relationship and relying on the nuclear arsenal. Finally, we could have, the European Union might have enhanced regional stability, particularly with regard to Eastern Europe, but also Northern Africa, and more regional stability, being able to address more regional threats that might need a more localized answer and a tailored response. On the other side, we have several challenges. Financial constraints, first of all. If a nuclear arsenal that provides extended deterrence to Europe, to European Union, provided by France, is a possibility, there must be a system to put in place for cost sharing among European states. Otherwise, also trust and commitment might not be really a long-term viable option in the future, because also economic constraints really do matter a lot in that sense. A nuclear arsenal, it's really cost demanding, and both developing it and maintaining it, so that is an essential point to me. Second is the political fragmentation. Different EU members have different national interests and different threats assessments. For example, we think about the situation in Ukraine. Eastern Europe has a different level of threat with regard to that as compared to Western states, and different commitments towards nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. And that leads to the last point, which is international regulatory outlets. Of course, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty limits the spread of nuclear weapons, so we must understand what does having a nuclear arsenal that provides extended deterrence to Europe means in that sense. Does it mean building up new weapons? Probably not. Does it mean relying on the French one? And also, how do we develop that with the cost that we need to share, as I said before? So to summarize, I think some key themes here are really like, should the European Union still push for the autonomy or rely on the alliance, on NATO? There are two different paradigms, autonomy versus staying within the alliance in that sense, that do not necessarily clash with each other. We can discuss this in the Q&A or during the coffee break later on, but there are some different models that can arise from this. Second is the credibility, as I said before, and third is the long-term viability. I stressed a lot about the financial constraints because this is really a hot topic in that sense, something that is discussed among member states of the European Union and will always be a point of discussion, even if this option is considered more seriously. With regard to NATO and European Union, I personally believe there should be a stronger dialogue on that, as like the European Union and the member states should consider this option more seriously to understand what would be the political and financial consequences of that, and to seriously evaluate the financial feasibility of such option, as well as strengthening European research and development of that as part of the enhancement efforts that are going to be done in the future in the security and defense framework in Europe. So I hope that answered some of your question, and I welcome any other in the Q&A. But yeah, for now, I thank you for your attention, and there's the last one.
Thank you very much, Elena. Next, we'll hear from Andrew Carroll. Andrew, it's a pleasure to welcome you from the U.S. Air Force nuclear and missile operations. So we are having a person who is actually responsible for some elements of the nuclear deterrence operations and training. That includes the ICBMs, but also engaged in a number of efforts and initiatives connected with more research and analysis of nuclear deterrence. So I think a good mixture of practical experience and also analytical approach. So Andrew, the floor is yours. I think I'll say it here.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning. As Lukasz said, my name is Andrew Carroll. I'm a nuclear and missile operations officer in the United States Air Force. And just before beginning, I did want to say that the comments today that I make are going to be my own and not representative of the United States Air Force, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the United States government. So to begin with today, I'm going to be talking about the idea of embracing multiple centers of decision-making and how we can use that framework as a way to enhance NATO's regional deterrence in Europe going forward. Next slide, please. So in particular, I wanted to begin with why this project in particular and why talk about this particular subject. This was particularly inspired by the beginning of actually the Russian invasion of Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, one of the most interesting things I thought was that France at the time, as you can see from the article here, for those of you who can read French, put 3 of their 4 nuclear missile submarines out to sea. And on top of that, you had officials like the French foreign minister making very direct comments that Putin needed to remember that France was part of NATO and that NATO remains a nuclear alliance, and had to take that into his decision-making calculus moving forward with actions in Ukraine. And I thought that was a very stark difference from years and years of French nuclear policy towards NATO that really I thought was potentially opening the door to change in policy going forward. Couple that with very clear changes in direction in the United States toward wanting to shift our focus within the U.S. Department of Defense towards China. I'm sure most of you in this room have heard that the main phrase that we like to say in the U.S. is that China is the pacing threat and Russia is the acute threat. And really, I just had the opportunity to return from a month-long stint at the Air University, which is the consortium of organizations within the U.S. Air Force that includes the Air War College, Air Command and Staff College, and Squadron Officer School. And it was really made apparent there that China is the focus of the U.S. going forward. So with that in mind, I wanted to take a look at how we can potentially take in this idea of adapting our deterrence in Europe with the idea that defense budgets are going to be constrained. The program of record that is the ongoing U.S. nuclear modernization is going to be taking time, as I'm sure all of you have seen in the news, of the various delays that the program has encountered and cost overruns. And on top of that, we are going to be constrained by a desire to shift our focus towards China, while also sources that have been focused for almost 3 decades now on a counterinsurgency campaign in the Middle East and Afghanistan towards a more peer-to-peer threat. Next slide, please. Of course, though, this wouldn't be right to talk about why, wouldn't be right to begin without talking about why our nuclear weapons are still important in the context of NATO deterrence as a whole. So overall, I would say a focus towards China, of course, does not mean an abandonment of Europe, and in many ways, I hope to dovetailed this presentation nicely with Ilenia's great presentation earlier about a more European ownership of the program, of how the US can shift its focus more towards the Indo-Pacific and China without completely abandoning its commitment to its NATO and its European allies. But that being said, our current ongoing changes within our programs and the Cold War bases that many of our forces still are focused on is going to necessitate, I think, a number of changes in order to impact towards a tailored regional deterrence approach to more effectively respond to the changes our adversaries are making going forward. Next slide, please. So, beginning with NATO's nuclear posture, this is a lot of words on the screen here, but a very short way of summing it up is that NATO remains a nuclear alliance. Has been reaffirmed by continuous strategic posture statements, fundamentally based on the idea of a fundamental guarantee from the US strategic forces, but also with British and French nuclear forces playing a role as well. And this was really reaffirmed by NATO's 1974 Ottawa Declaration, which fully stated and recognized the importance of multiple centers of decision-making within the alliance, not just looking at the idea that we were primarily focused on the United States above all others. With that in mind, I think that's something we really can draw upon as we look to shift NATO's nuclear deterrence forces and its outlook on regional deterrence in Europe going forward. Next slide, please. So, of course, this wouldn't be also important to go over some of the threat landscape. I won't belabor these slides too much because I'm sure everyone in this room is well aware of the threats landscape we face. But obviously, we have a massive Chinese nuclear expansion currently going on. As was previously mentioned, they're looking to get around 1,500 strategic nuclear weapons by around the 2030s by US DoD. Estimates, and they're also working to currently build out a full operational nuclear triad between land-based missiles, submarines, and weapons delivered through strategic bombers. On top of that, Russia is nearly complete with its own modernization of its own nuclear forces, but its legacy systems from the Cold War still remain very potent and things that we need to take certainly seriously. Next slide, please. Now, looking at more the blue side, obviously I talked a little bit already about the U.S. nuclear modernization, which is really a legacy-based system of a one-for-one swap of the U.S. nuclear triad. So replacing our nuclear submarines, replacing our ICBMs, and giving updates to our strategic bombers. On top of that, the UK is obviously undergoing its own nuclear modernization, as is France, in terms of delivery systems in order to more effectively deliver strategic systems. But I think something that is often under-discussed in the context of nuclear modernization when we talk about U.S. and allied conventional forces, nuclear forces, that we are also retooling our conventional forces. And I have this map up on the screen here because I think this is a good representation of things that, at least in the United States, keep civilian policymakers and military strategists up at night. A projection of modernized PLA forces versus current U.S. assets, and really showing the need and the real constrained resource environment that we're currently operating in that China has had years and years to build up its forces, and the U.S. is now just beginning to retool its forces to adjust to this dynamic after years of fighting insurgency wars in the Middle East. These are things I think are going to constrain any sort of radical changes in our nuclear policy going forward. Just the budgets are going to remain limited. It would be great to say that, yes, we can just spend as much money as we want and retool all of our nuclear and conventional forces at the same time. But unfortunately, I just don't think that is going to be the reality. So that's going to force us to have to make hard choices going forward as we look to fight or look to adapt our deterrence to two different theaters. Next slide, please. With that in mind, wanted to look in particular at the current French and British nuclear force composition. Obviously, the French have an air and sea-based force with currently costing about 10 to 11% of the French defense budget being dedicated towards the modernization and upkeep of their nuclear forces, vice the UK, where that sits somewhere between 5 to 6%, depending on how you look to draw the numbers. That being said, though, as we talked about in the previous presentation, there are a number of key changes that are ongoing, notably not only from that we saw as evidence in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also in events like President Macron's 2020 speech in front of the École de Guerre, where he put forward the idea on the table of opening up French nuclear planning and nuclear exercises, possibly to include more European partners. And we did see this operationalized in the case of, for example, Italian involvement in some of the French air nuclear exercises recently. That being said, France is obviously still not part of NATO's nuclear planning group, but I think some of these key operational changes are things that we can take advantage of, on top of the fact that France has for years been dedicating a lot of key resources to adapting their nuclear forces to help enhance deterrence capabilities in Europe going forward. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, I wanted to transition a little bit towards what exactly, with all of this framing in mind, what exactly we can do. So obviously this is all designed with the assumption in mind that we are going to be operating in this constrained environment from a budgetary standpoint, and having the United States shift the burden of more of its strategic deterrence needs towards the PRC. But obviously, since the Russian threat still remains very acute and persistent in Europe, how can we adapt NATO's deterrent posture going forward? I think there are a number of things that we can do immediately that would not be overly burdensome on our industrial base, as well as our current deployed forces. Namely, and this comes to tailoring our deterrence to adapt towards regional coercion. In particular, I think adapting the NATO DCA mission is something that can be done in the immediate near term, can help retain a U.S. involvement in Europe's strategic deterrence needs, while also building out a capability to involve more of France and the UK. In particular here, I think expanding the DCA mission to possibly include states such as Poland, and this doesn't have to be just including from an aircraft standpoint. This can include things like infrastructure improvements to improve, for example, runways and facilities forward within Europe, can go a long way towards looking to deter Russian threats moving forward. As currently, the U.S. is only able to operate strategic bombers out of RAF Fairford here in the UK, and has only recently begun to exercise bomber task force missions out to Norway and Iceland. So that could be a good way, in particular, of enhancing strategic deterrence through looking at also bolstering the DCA mission. On top of that, I think one of the other challenges that we face going forward is that there is a real lack of understanding in the interplay between conventional and nuclear forces. Back in the Cold War, most of the conventional forces in NATO militaries had to have some kind of an understanding of nuclear dynamics and how nuclear deterrence would impact their ability to exercise their own operational requirements. But we got away from that really with the end of the Cold War to the state today where many of NATO's conventional forces don't have any knowledge of nuclear dynamics at all. I think building out more of that conventional nuclear integration capability is something that we really could do in the near term to help bolster our deterrence requirements, to actually show that our deterrent remains viable in the face of a number of key Russian threats in Europe. And that's somewhere where I think the UK in particular can play a very strong role. Obviously, the UK has adopted the F-35B model, which is not likely to be certified for the NATO DCA mission like the F-35A model currently has been, but it could play a key role in that conventional nuclear integration piece on top of upgrading facilities that we have across Europe, so we're not reliant on just a handful of key bases for operating non-strategic and strategic nuclear systems. On top of that, I think possibly expanding the nuclear submarine fleets of the US, or the UK and France, excuse me, could be something that would be very useful. Currently, the full complement of missiles and warheads is not fully deployed on UK submarines in particular. That could be something that could be uploaded in the near term, especially as Russian focuses on arms control continue to wane, and they show not really to have an interest in that with the demise of the New START Treaty. And countries like France could look to expand their nuclear forces to 6 instead of 4 submarines. This was the original plan for forces in the 1990s, but was scaled down with the end of the Cold War. This could reduce deployment times, and as a way to draw upon additional forces, additional deterrent forces to be able to generate them in a crisis, or adapt to any maintenance concerns or unexpected sidelining of forces in any sort of contingency. So it does require a culture shift, but is something I think is doable in the near term. Next slide, please. Obviously, there are some challenges to implementation. Again, as I was saying, longstanding cultural practices, security, classification concerns, including sharing of resources or sharing of intelligence and exercise information between the US and the UK and France. But I do think it is something that we can adapt to, again, taking advantage of some of those recent changes, in particular of French nuclear policy approaches. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, I thank you for your time. Look forward to questions you have on, I think, this interesting time in the European deterrence space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, both for presenting the threat environment and the capabilities, but also ending up with some of the pragmatic ideas that acting within the construct what we have can increase its credibility, and I think they will have a number of question and follow-up issues with some of the things on your list. Now we are zooming in on the UK and on the UK nuclear deterrent and its place within a broader construct and the range of capabilities which the UK has. And presenting this will be Charlotte and Tim Levy. Charlotte, both with Babcock International. Charlotte, who joined the company in 2018 with a degree in applied chemistry, PhD in physical chemistry. Team, actually a relatively new addition to the Babcock team, joining last year by a safety engineering graduate scheme. So one of the ways to enlarge the workforce, and I think this is a good example of this interdisciplinary approach that PONI would like to foster, because your presentation would be on the approach and increasing the credibility of deterrence. So, Charlotte, Tim, the floor is yours.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Charlotte Levy, and my background's in chemistry, and I'm a nuclear safety engineer working for Babcock, but currently seconded with GB Nuclear. And this is Timothy Levy, who's undertaking the Nuclear Safety Engineering graduate scheme with Babcock also, and his background's in geology. Today, we're presenting a framework for mitigating nuclear escalation. Next slide, please. Thank you. It's important to note that all views expressed in this presentation are ours and do not reflect those of our employers or PONI or RUSI. Next slide, please. Thank you. The UK has a single delivery system for a strategic nuclear deterrent, which is to be used only in extreme circumstances. However, given the current climate, such as increases in cyber warfare, continuing cuts in our conventional forces, and recent rising tensions between nuclear states, the UK is in a particularly unsettling position, where a combination of any or all of these factors could push the UK towards either premature nuclear escalation, given that we only have a single delivery system, or capitulation. We've conducted an extensive literature review, and our findings have led us to develop this framework, which outlines 5 domains that we believe should be strengthened in order to prevent premature nuclear escalation. The domains are displayed in this onion or layered framework that you can see on the screen here, and the domains are cyberspace, airspace defense capabilities, command and control or C2 systems, the conventional military, and finally, nuclear use. We acknowledge the interconnected nature of these domains, but we've placed them in this order because we believe this represents the order of dependence each layer has given a conflict with regards to mitigating early nuclear use. We're now going to present why we think each domain is important, what we believe the UK's causes for concern are with each domain, and finally, our proposed solutions for the UK to strengthen each domain with the overall aim of mitigating premature nuclear escalation.
The first domain in our framework is cyberspace, because it's the first line of defense or attack prior to physical warfare. Cyber attacks are becoming more frequent. If an actor maliciously chooses to compromise our systems, there's an untold amount of damage they could do. For example, they could disable various alarm systems, or they could provide false readings on our systems, or a hostile state could obtain key information about our operations. Ideally, though, this would be vice versa. Therefore, we need to protect our data and IT infrastructure, which also helps to ensure the protection of our critical national infrastructure and important supply chains. Cyberspace contains three elements: hardware, software, and personnel. Hardware and software are obvious things to consider. However, personnel are the ones often targeted, which was the case in the colonial pipeline hacking of 2021. We propose developing crucial IT and cybersecurity skills in the United Kingdom, which are currently lacking, as this will enable us to better implement the secure by design approach, which is central to a positive security culture. Additionally, we think that the use of tools and services provided by the ACD program should be incentivized, because most organizations don't seek guidance on cybersecurity from outside their own organization, but to help to combat the effects of low-level cybercrime, which will also free up resources to tackle the more organized threats. And finally, we believe changing our underpinning operating system from Microsoft to Linux will greatly improve this domain, especially as the software community has already criticized the use of Windows for a deterrence-carrying submarine. This is because Linux is a core technology to our society, and using it facilitates an enhanced understanding of kernel security. Our second domain is air defense capability, which is dependent on the cybersecurity layer. For example, if a hacker disables our alarm systems, then our airspace defenses are nullified. In the present day, we have low-cost drones and cheap missile technology, which is placing more emphasis on having adequate air defense capabilities than ever before. As I'm sure we've all seen, the infamous Shahed 136 drone, which is a category of loitering ammunition, has proven its effectiveness in Ukraine for Russia because of its simplicity and low cost. Given these low-cost air threats, which often work in conjunction with other projectiles, it is imperative that the United Kingdom has sufficient air defense systems. Currently, our air defense systems are very limited to the point of being negligible and are entirely inadequate. Ukraine has more air defense capabilities than the United Kingdom, and thus would be in a worse position given such attacks. Finally, the United Kingdom has a lack of land-based ballistic missile defense. We have Sea Viper and Sky Sabre as our current air defense capabilities, with Sky Sabre currently deployed in Poland. However, NATO still only has 5% of air defences needed to protect the eastern flank. We believe the United Kingdom should invest in and develop layered air defense systems across all branches of the military that work in conjunction with each other, such as the United States Army Integrated Battle Command System. We also think that the United Kingdom should consider an Iron Dome system similar to that in Israel, although very recent announcements have shown that the United Kingdom is currently considering a Super Dome, which is similar. Our third domain is C2 systems, which connects all information and military assets and facilitates decision-making. C2 capability is important across all domains, but we've placed it at this point in the framework because effective C2 is dependent on secure cyber infrastructure and effective sensory information gathered from air defense systems. The main cause for concern regarding our C2 systems is that they are stubbornly static, and that we are currently lacking a sufficient ground-based air defense C2 capability. To improve the situation, firstly, we think that everything that was discussed regarding the cyberspace and air defense capability domains apply here. And secondly, we propose multiple independent C2 architectures capable of communicating with each other, but integrated with new technologies such as AI. Because it is a mistake to believe that a single architecture can support all the requirements of future military networks, especially when considering that C2 underpins every domain in our framework. Our fourth domain is the conventional military, because rarely will a nation jump to nuclear straight away. So basically, any war fighting will be conventional before it becomes nuclear. And so we aim to sustain the conventional effort for as long as possible. This domain is a weakness for the United Kingdom because we can only sustain a conventional war for a short period of time, with estimates ranging from 2 weeks up to a possible maximum of 2 months. This is because we lack personnel, equipment, and ammunition. Specifically, artillery ammunition is important because most casualties are caused by artillery. We think the United Kingdom should produce and acquire more 155mm artillery shells. because this round is the NATO standard and can be loaded into any NATO standard weapon, and therefore shared amongst allies, which will foster a sense of camaraderie. Also, an analysis by the United States Army shows that the 2022 daily average artillery fire in Ukraine was 30,000 rounds of this particular shell. However, this is almost 10 times the US monthly production. It has been noted by famous military figures that artillery is king. Stalin called artillery the god of war, and Bonaparte is reported to have said that God fights on the side of the best artillery. It is imperative that the United Kingdom does not forget this. We believe we chose to get rid of our 105mm light guns because they simply lack power and range compared to a 155 round. Finally, we need to increase reservists across the armed forces by improving recruitment and enhancing retention. Regulars and reservists have performed well in Ukraine, and for us, it only costs 1/5 to train a reservist over a regular.
Our final domain is nuclear use, which represents the point at which the UK is considering the use of nuclear weapons to preserve peace, prevent coercion, and deter aggression. We have our continuous at-sea deterrent, or CASD, which is strategically very powerful. Unfortunately, we only have the single delivery system upon which we can rely, and it may not provide the proportionate response that we need for the situation at hand. More states are acquiring not only nuclear, but biological and chemical weapons that can be used in a tactical capacity. If a state believes that limited nuclear use on their part is possible without triggering a nuclear response from us, then our nuclear deterrence is undermined. Therefore, so as not to be confronted with an all-or-nothing choice, one needs at least a second system for a last warning shot in the hope that the enemy will back off, realizing that they've miscalculated our determination to defend ourselves. Therefore, our proposed solution is to essentially add another layer into this part of the framework. An air-based tactical delivery system will allow us to not only diversify our nuclear platforms, but also our payload. With our F-35 fighters, we can incorporate 2 different air-launched nuclear systems, the first being the American B-6112 gravity bomb, with yield options ranging from 0.3 to 50 kilotons, the payload of which will have to be communicated in advance of its use. This gravity bomb can also be modified into a glide bomb, which have been very effective for the Russians as of late. And the second air-launched nuclear system to consider is a nuclear-tipped hypersonic missile, such as the Mako multi-mission hypersonic missile, which we're suggesting could be modified to deliver a small nuclear payload. These air-based options fill a capability gap and will hopefully deter an adversary from pursuing their intended course of aggression. However, exhausting our tactical options, it's then crucial that an SSBN is available to launch the Trident ballistic missile and the British-made nuclear warhead. So to summarise, we've conducted an extensive literature review to determine how we can mitigate premature nuclear escalation. As a result of our research, we've developed this framework that outlines 5 domains that we think should be strengthened in order to prevent premature nuclear escalation. And these 5 domains are cyberspace, airspace defence capabilities, C2 systems, the conventional military, and nuclear use. In conclusion, we believe that the UK should strengthen these identified domains in the ways we've just discussed, as we think this is crucial to mitigating situations that may lead to premature nuclear escalation. Thank you all for your attention.